Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today we are going to be looking at Holo Taco's Holoween Collection. This is a 6-piece lineup that features a range of finishes, including one limited edition thermal, and we also have a new seasonal Aqua glow-in-the-dark taco. So as always, I will save more of my thoughts for the end after comparisons. For now, let me just show you the swatches. Actually, first, let's take a quick look at the limited edition collection carton that these come in. It has a really spooky green and black colorway going on with this sort of graveyard imagery, and then the individual boxes are just a simple black and green gradient. So first up we have just Vamped, which is a deep eggplant crelly. A crelly, if you don't know, is kind of an in-between of a jelly or a translucent formula and a more opaque cream. So this had an okay formula. I would say the first coat was a little bit uneven, but very pigmented, and since it is a bit of a darker purple, it built up much better in 2 coats. Though I don't think you can tell on camera, but I did see some unevenness, mainly on the left side of my nail, so I did end up having to do another swipe and a half, not really a full 3rd coat to cover it, and it actually evened out really nicely and self-leveled really well. I think this is a great spooky purple where it's really dark but still purple. Next is Thirst Trap, a shiny, bright, blood red metallic microfoil flaky. So this is the same finish as some recent shades like Stop Buggin' or Teal with It, but for some reason I feel like the micro flakies in this one were even smaller. It honestly just kind of read as a shimmer to me more than a micro flaky. It's possible that the base of this one is just a lot more pigmented than the other 2 shades, so I'm not really sure, but either way it had a really full coverage formula that was super pigmented and fully opaque in 2 coats. Then we have Trick or Trash, which is described as a near black jelly base filled with multicolored foil flakies. So as expected for a jelly formula, it was pretty sheer on the first coat, as you can see. It wasn't super difficult to work with, but it is really packed with the flakies, so I could see this one needing some finagling to spread out the flakies evenly. You can see what I mean here on the second coat, where I just kind of have to reapply in certain spots, mainly on the edges of my nail where it just doesn't seem like the polish wants to move there. So because it is a little finicky, you might need a 3rd coat if you want more full coverage, or of course you could just layer this over black, but I loved the rainbow flakies in this one. Up next is So Toxic, a bright slime green crelly. Unfortunately, this one had a super streaky formula. I was expecting it to be slightly uneven, similar to Just Vamped, but this was somehow worse, which was such a shame because I love a bright green for Halloween. The second coat didn't really improve it that much. Like, you can still clearly see there are these streaks all over, so I just didn't find this one to be self-leveling like the others. So the shade definitely needed a 3rd coat to really even it out. I tried to do a little bit more of a thicker coat and was more careful with floating my brush, but I feel like maybe in certain angles of lighting you can just still see it's not fully even. Then we have Dead Serious, which is a multi-chrome that shifts from a blackened purple to red in extreme angles. So this had a slightly sheer, almost jelly leaning formula, but it wasn't terribly uneven like the Crellies, for example. You can see it is pretty pigmented on the first coat, but of course if you are looking close enough, you can still see some visible nail line. So I would still recommend doing a 2nd coat for this one. I personally thought it was passable here in 2 coats, but I could see some people needing 3 depending on your preference, if you want it to be even more fully opaque, or again, you could probably just layer this over black. I really appreciated that this wasn't another true black to red multi-chrome and that it is more of that super dark purple. It still feels so perfect for spooky season. And rounding out the collection is Simply Deceased, which is the limited edition thermal that transitions from a blackened burgundy when cold, as seen in the bottle and here, to a bright red when warm. It's also filled with red iridescent flakies and a scattered hollow, which, to be honest, I didn't even know was in here. I just thought it was a flaky thermal and thought it was really pretty as is. I also first thought this was a black to red thermal, but you can tell in the cold state it isn't a true black. It does have this darker purple undertone, though I would say it's most obvious on the first coat where it is a little bit sheer, but once you do build it up in 2 coats and it's more fully opaque, it's pretty dark that it does kind of read as black in most lighting. This had a great formula though, fully opaque in just 2 coats. And launching alongside the collection is the new and seasonal Aqua Glow-in-the-Dark Taco. So they recommend wearing this over white, which is what I'm showing here. And while it looks pretty milky in the bottle, I didn't find it altered the white base that much. Like maybe it does have a little tinge of yellow or milkiness, but it's not as bad as the original glow. And here in the dark, you can see just how bright it is, even for just 1 coat. I would say it's pretty even for the most part, but you might want to do 2. And since this is technically a topper, I also wanted to show how this looks over a clear base coat and over black. So as expected, you can really see that milkiness over black, so I wouldn't recommend this over darker colors, but I feel like it's somehow passable over the base coat. Like it just kind of looks like a sheer neutral nail, if that makes sense. But unfortunately, the glow was significantly weaker over both of these, so I can see why it's suggested to wear it over white. This was charged for the same amount of time, by the way. And next for my skittle portion, I have the collection worn in 2 coats each with glossy top coat, with the exception for So Toxic, because I just wanted to show you how sheer and streaky that still was. So I ended up doing a 3rd coat for that one with glossy top coat, and it looked a lot better. You can still see a hint of visible nail line though, which is expected since it is a crelly kind of finish. But yeah, the rest of the shades I think look really great. Maybe in direct sunlight you can see Dead Serious on my pinky is a little bit sheer, so if your nails are longer, you might want a 3rd coat. Here next to the window you can also better see the red multi-chrome shift, since that comes out in more extreme angles of lighting. And then lastly, in lower lighting, you can see just how dark some of these shades do look, where most of them can read as black, especially Just Vamped on my ring finger, but I would say in most other lighting you can still tell that it's purple, but just a really dark purple. And lastly, I wanted to test out the Aqua Glow-in-the-Dark Taco over So Toxic, since it is a pretty bright color, so I had high hopes for it. I was here for a minute or 2 just charging it in direct sunlight, but unfortunately it still had a pretty weak glow, at least compared to how it looked over white. And for reference, I had grabbed the bottle in the last couple of seconds, but that pulled a stronger glow. Moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Just Vamped, and I wanted to quickly show it next to Indigo Away, which I thought was going to be pretty close to it, but as you can tell, it is more of a true indigo. It's a lot more blue leaning and also a few shades darker, and I figured I could also show this next to ILNP's Nightshade, which is another dark purple crelly. So on the first coat, they do look kind of similar, but the big difference is once you do the second coat, because Nightshade basically turns into a black shade, while Just Vamped maintains that purple color. I think the closest purple that I have to Just Vamped is Mooncat's Queen of Chaos, which is more of a true cream finish, though again, because Just Vamped is so dark, it kind of just reads as a cream as well. I thought they looked really similar in the bottle, but on the nail, the Mooncat is a smidge darker and a little bit more blue-toned. And for reference, here is Just Vamped next to the 2 recent Mooncat purples, Hell is Other People on the left and the Doppelganger on the right. I would say that even though Just Vamped reads as a more warm-toned purple, it looks cooler toned next to these 2. Next for Thirst Trap, here it is next to Cardinal Sins from the most recent Holo Renaissance collection. I thought these were going to be more similar, at least color-wise, because they're obviously very different finishes, but Cardinal Sins is a few shades darker and also more muted. It's not as saturated or bright and punchy in color. So then I pulled out Favorite Sister, which is another super vibrant red in a more true foil metallic finish, so the flakies in that are much larger. And I also pulled out Private Villa, which again has a totally different finish, but I just thought color-wise it was kind of giving a similar vibe to Thirst Trap, being a very intense, bright red pink kind of color, but it does lean a lot more pink, while Favorite Sister is a bit of a deeper red. I feel like between these two, Thirst Trap looks almost orangey. So for reference, here it is next to Holo Taco's Hot Take, which is a true red-orange kind of color. That one is a lot brighter, even more orange leaning, so Thirst Trap does look red next to this shade. It's just kind of a chameleon. For some other reds, here it is next to Red Licorice, which is their red linear holo, along with Naughty List, which is the red micro glitter formula. I feel like these two are similar to Private Villa and Favorite Sister in a way, where Red Licorice is a little bit more pink leaning, Naughty List is maybe more of that true red but a bit darker, and then Thirst Trap sitting in between these two just pulls a little bit more orange. And here it is next to swatch sticks of Sacrifical Lacquer by Holo Taco, which is the magnetic, as well as Mooncat's Pandemonium, which I thought was going to be more of a dupe, but that one is a little bit more orange. Next for ILNP, I thought the closest red to this was going to be Penny. I feel like they do look pretty similar in the bottle, but more so on camera than they do in real life. While ILNP does have this micro flaky / large shimmer particle, it does have a more noticeable yellow gold kind of color, and the base is a bit darker too. And lastly, for some cracked reds, I think the two closest shades are 23 Flavors and Eat, Drink, and Be Cherry. Even finish-wise, Eat, Drink, and Be Cherry I think looks kind of close, although it is more of a true shimmer, not really a micro flaky, because 23 Flavors is more of that smooth metallic kind of finish, but I would still say that the two cracked shades are a smidge darker, so they're not exact dupes. And similar to other previous comparisons, Thirst Trap is pulling a little bit more orangey next to these two reds, so I imagine, depending on your undertone, it could lean more orange or more pink. Then for Trigger Trash, I knew I had to show this next to Mooncat's Chemical X from their Powerpuff Girls collab a few years ago, because that's another black jelly base filled with these rainbow flakies, though the flakies in Mooncat are a lot larger and also more iridescent as opposed to a metallic foil. And I figured I could show it next to ILNP's Overboard from their recent Twisted collection. That one is a magnetic, but moving all the magnetic shimmer out of the way to reveal the flakies, you can see that they are a little bit smaller, so these are all pretty similar. And next to these two, I would say that Trigger Trash almost has a little bit of a brownish undertone. Up next for So Toxic, the closest Holo Taco green that I had was Full Charge, which is a bright, almost lime green, but it's much more yellow leaning in color, not to mention it's a linear holo. And here it is also next to Mooncat's Ribbit from the Remedy collection. That one's another bright kind of green that's a little closer in tone, but more pastel. Here it is next to ILNP's Playlist and Mooncat's Highway Glow, both of which are a bit more yellow leaning, almost in the tennis ball color category, and Playlist is more of a true neon as well, so you can see that So Toxic is very bright, but not exactly a neon. So for a true neon lime green, here it is next to ILNP's Sour Apple from the Sweet Escape collection this past summer. That one is also more of a true jelly kind of finish, so showing them in 1 and 2 coats, you can see the difference in their coverage, where the first coat maybe looks a little bit similar, but the second coat still shows a lot more visible nail line with ILNP, and here you can also tell a little bit more of a difference in the color, so they're definitely not exact dupes. And lastly, I wanted to quickly show this next to Cirque's Cream, which is one of their Vice shades, another true neon kind of color. I thought this was going to be a little bit closer, but it's a bit too white-based and slightly more yellow-leaning. I unfortunately don't have Cushy anymore, which I think would just be too dark, but the closest shade that I have, I think, is Crack's Ooze, which is another lime green kind of crelly. So they basically have the same finish, but I think Cracked is a bit more neon. Next, for Dead Serious, we of course are looking at it next to Double Dare and ILNP's Eclipse, both of which are more true black to red multi-chromes. I'm not sure how well you can tell in the bottle at least, but it'll be obvious on the nail that Dead Serious does have a little bit more of that purple kind of color. So it's not a true black as the other two shades. Double Dare does have this extra reflective glitter as well, so it's definitely not close enough. I would say Eclipse is the closest to being a dupe, especially when it comes to that strong red shimmer in extreme lighting. Unfortunately, by comparison, Double Dare just is a little bit lacking with the red shimmer. But more than anything, I knew I had to see this next to Mooncat's Gates of Hell, which I still cannot believe they retired. It is one of my favorite Mooncat shades because it is another deep eggplant to red multi-chrome. So I would say that Holo Taco is the closest to Mooncat's Gates of Hell. It's not an exact dupe because Mooncat has this holographic sparkle, but that's easy enough to add. If anything, I would say that Mooncat is maybe a little bit deeper, and the multi-chrome shimmer is also a little bit different, where it goes to yellow in extreme lighting in Holo Taco. It's hard to see on my nail, but if you look at the top edges of the bottles, you can see what I mean. And lastly, here it is next to Gosh Garnet, which was from the Birthstones collection last year. That's another dark multi-chrome kind of shade. So they have a similar vibe for sure, but you can see that Gosh Garnet has more of that red shimmer head on as opposed to in extreme angles. And again, for the multi-chrome shimmer, it's a little bit more shifty in Gosh Garnet, going from red to green in very extreme angles, while Dead Serious goes from red to copper to yellow. Then for Simply Deceased, I figured I could just try to recreate it with some nail art using ILNP's Hex and Holo Taco's Big Reef Energy, both of which are these jelly-based flaky bomb type of polishes. So I'm sure you can tell in the bottle that Hex is more of a true black base, but again, on the nail, I feel like Simply Deceased just kind of reads as black. And I would say my recreation was pretty spot on. The main difference is that the flakies in Big Reef Energy are a little bit more blue in color, so it's not exactly the same. And for reference, here it is next to Fauve's Torment, which recently came out. This one has a similar vibe and color, but it's a magnetic, so the shimmer overpowers any of the flakies. And lastly, for Aqua Glow in the Dark Taco, we of course are going to be comparing this next to the original that came out a few years ago. Right away, they look pretty much the same in the bottle, but again, on the nail, I did notice that the Aqua Glow in the Dark applies a little bit more clear and less cloudy than the original. So it does make a pretty big difference if you are applying it over a bare nail or a sheer base coat, as I'm showing here. So I think the Aqua can work, while the regular glow in the dark maybe it just alters the base color a little bit too much, which is what I remembered over white as well. It just has a little bit more of a dingy kind of color. It might be hard to tell here on camera, but it is a little bit more noticeable in real life. But either way, they both really pop over the white base. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Holo Taco's Holoween collection. As always, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on this release because overall, I thought it was nice. I think I was mainly excited to see a true Holoween collection from Holo Taco because it's just been a few years since we got one. And while these were released for the holiday, I do greatly appreciate that the majority of these are not seasonal or limited edition in that way. way, so they are going to be permanent to their catalog. And speaking of the seasonal aspect, I was excited to see the Aqua glow-in-the-dark taco because I've just been so kind of bored of the green glow-in-the-darks that we've seen. I know it's because they do have the strongest glow-in-the-dark effect, so it makes sense, but after a while it just kind of gets a little boring, so I always love seeing a different color, and I think this one is a really great contender for a strong glow, with the caveat being it has to be layered over a white. Maybe that's going to be limiting for some people, but I think there's still a lot of great potential for nail art. Overall, I am a fan of their glow-in-the-dark finish because even though this one and the original were on the more milky side, so you know they don't really make the best toppers, they do have the best glow-in-the-dark finish, which is like the whole point of them. So I'm more of a fan of these compared to something that does apply clear, but it has like a much weaker glow. As far as my criticisms go, I'm sure you can guess that it's mainly towards the Crellies of the collection, but for different reasons. As I've mentioned before, I'm just not the biggest fan of Crellies in darker colors because they just end up looking like creams. And that's exactly how I felt about Just Vamped, where, you know, once it's built up, it just looks like a dark purple cream, which there's nothing wrong with that, but just make it opaque at that point. Unfortunately, the bigger disappointment was So Toxic because it was just so incredibly streaky. I don't know if I just got a bad bottle. I don't know how it's going to apply for other people, but I was just not impressed with it. And I definitely would have preferred if that one was a much more opaque, creamy formula because again, I think with Holo Taco's Crellies, they do tend to skew more towards the cream side of the scale. So you just don't get a lot of that squishiness with them to begin with, and it makes the formulas not the best in my experience, or, you know, they're just okay where they're like a watered down cream. So it is a little mix of, you know, my personal preference, but with the green, I think that is more of like an objectively not great formula. And lastly, this is more of a nitpick, but when it comes to Thirst Trap, I wish that it was just a darker, vampier, blood red kind of shade. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that if they did come out with a darker red, some people probably still would have been upset by it because it maybe would be too close to Crimson Void or Bite Me. But I feel like there are so many shades of red in between this and those darker ones that they could have gone with. So we could have gotten something a little darker without it being a dupe for something that's already retired. But those are pretty much my thoughts on this release, so make sure to let me know yours down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!